Okay, peeps, welcome back. So today we're going to be going over the Bitcoin miners and also options plays on the miners, which is one of the reasons why we own these. So with that being said, let's get it. All right, so we're going to go through the miners first. We'll go through the miners, the buys and sell zones, and the earnings, and then we'll get into the options. So just taking a look at the price of CleanSpark, it does still look very bullish. We had kind of this huge pump, it looks like, into earnings here, as you guys can see. This is actually the wrong time frame. Sorry about that. So on the monthly, it does look very bullish. The two previous earnings, as you got, well, okay, they had a miss on revenue, but a beat on the earnings. This previous time, they had a beat on both, which makes sense because Bitcoin was moonshotting. So it's very profitable for the miners when Bitcoin goes higher. So we got earnings coming up on CleanSpark, like we told you guys. This is going to be in 4 days. So this is on Wednesday. Today is Saturday. Markets are closed for these miner stocks until Monday. So again, by the time you guys see this video, I believe it's going to be tomorrow. So it'll actually even be before the markets open, a day in advance, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, they have earnings on Wednesday. Here's the expectations. If we get a beat, the price is probably going to go up. If we get a miss, it's probably going to go down. But then again, markets don't necessarily go bullish on earnings beats, and they don't necessarily go bearish on earnings misses. The forward guidance has a lot to do with it as well. Excuse me. But in terms of the technicals, the buy zone is between basically 1220 to about 1390. Sell is between 21 to 2380. We're kind of stuck in the middle. Again, still kind of bobbing around in between this rising broadening wedge. Not really bullish, not really bearish, just kind of stuck in between the two zones. Again, you guys can do with that what you will. But from the buy zone to the sell zone, you'd be looking at about an 84% move up. And in terms of where the price could go down, you'd be looking at a maximum of roughly about 23%. Again, I don't know if it's likely to break this trend line down here because it's been kind of testing it over time and hasn't managed to successfully break it yet. Excuse me. So that's CLSK. Mara. So we are holding this resistance. The support here is going to be about $7.10 to about $12.22. $18 to about $20 on the resistance. But I think that this trend line is likely to hold. So again, this is kind of a broadening wedge and or a microphone pattern. And it's just bobbing around in between these two. I would say support is likely going to be the bottom of or at this trend line. So about $11. Just to give you guys an idea of how much this could potentially drop if it does drop. To get done on the trend line would be about 37%. Excuse me. But from the trend line up to the resistance, it'd be a huge move. So you're looking at about 92%. Now, if Mara does something really crazy and gets back up to this wick high up here, it's about 200% gain. So that's a pretty big gain. Again, that's going to be 29.10 to about 32.90. Now we'll move down a little bit here and take a look at the earnings. So again, earnings is going to be Thursday, so one day after CleanSpark. These are the expectations. The previous two earnings they did beat. Now, if Bitcoin stays stable during that time frame, we might see a beat. If it drops, we might see a miss. It's hard to say at this point, but their earnings are on deck, and there is expected to be some volatility, which is very good for people that want to make premiums on options. So Riot, you got your buy zone here at 760 to 1020. Sell zone at 1860 to about $21. So this is pretty close to the support zone here, as you guys can see, just to get from the current price to the previous high, 78%, and then the high before that, 97, 98%, somewhere in there. So it did have a good earnings. There was a miss on the revenue, but a beat on the actual earnings. So that's good, kind of a mixed bag. And it looks like the price pumped into earnings, but then it kind of dumped and it's just kind of chopping sideways now. So we'll have to see how this next market session plays out. But I would say this is a little bit more this is a more ideal one to get into in terms of buying. Whereas Mara, if I was going to play Mara, if I already had the shares, I would just write some calls because I would expect this to pull back a little bit. Maybe it's not a guarantee. Or you could write some really, really safe cash secured puts with like a 10-15 delta in case this does drop, so you don't have to get assigned. How you want to go about that's up to you. Again, Clean Spark is kind of a toss up. That's a coin flip because it's right in the middle of the zones. So BTBT has bounced off of support. Again, I don't think it's going to go below $2, but nothing's a guarantee. So support 155 to about $2. Resistance is 420 to about 480, and then the high up here is 530. So if I were to measure this from the current price to the previous wick high, you'd be looking at as much as 144% from the current price to the resistance zone, about 120%. So pretty good move there. And do keep in mind, BTBT on the last cycle high up here, you guys can see way up here, it was as high as $33. But again, back then we were in a QE bull market. This is a QT bull market. So I suspect the real parabolic phase of the bull run is not going to start until the end of the year because, again, presidential elections are coming up and the Fed's going to have to cut at some point. I mean, that's just the reality of things. They cannot keep rates higher for years on end. That's just not going to work for the economy. We've studied macroeconomics for a long time, and I can tell you guys right now, the cut is coming. It's just a matter of time. So we do own a lot of shares of BTBT at a relatively cheap price. So let's get into the earnings here. You guys can see earnings is on Monday. So this is actually before CleanSpark and Mara. So keep that in mind. Price does seem to be pumping into earnings, creating higher lows here. So that's a good sign. But we'll have to see how the markets react to that. HUD8, this thing is, again, just like BTBT and Riot, perfectly in the buy zone here. What you guys want to do with that's up to you. So that's between 370 to about 880 and resistance 1780 to about 22.5. So we are within this kind of falling wedge pattern. Again, this is a bullish pattern. The target is at the top of the wedge, which obviously is the swing high up there. So if we measure this from the current price to the top of the wedge up, or basically the top of the wedge, previous swing high up here, 170% move. However, if it does drop down to, let's say, the bottom of the wedge, I mean, that could be as much as 40%. I don't think that's going to happen, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, it hasn't gone that low basically at all since the bear market lows. I mean, we have not seen prices that low. The lowest that we saw was like $6. So maybe $6 would be the bottom. I don't think it's actually going to hit the bottom of this wedge. That's just my opinion. But HUD8 earnings is not going to be on deck for a few months, so keep that in mind. CIFR, this one's also going to have earnings this week. That's on Tuesday. Right in line with Mara, if I'm not mistaken. No, my bad. So that's actually before Mara. So, okay, so CIFR is basically CIFR, BTBT, Mara, and CleanSpark are pretty much all going to be next week. So Riot just had earnings. That's now gone past us. So we'd be looking at the next earnings after this. Now, you guys can see the estimates here. How the market reacts and what the actual earnings are going to look like, we'll have to wait and see. So in terms of the technicals, again, this is kind of in the middle of chop zone. It's not really doing much. Support is 215 to about 270, 490 to 550 on the resistance, and then the wick high up there is 575. Again, we don't own any shares of this currently. We don't want to buy it right now because we want to try to wait to get closer to the zone, which, as you guys can see, is about 48% down. So now, just because we say we want to buy it at the zone doesn't mean that we're going to. That would be the time that we start thinking about it. So please don't misunderstand our words there. So from support to resistance, you'd be looking at about 136% move, and then up to the swing high, 145%. So BITF, once again, I think this thing probably holds the trend line down here at about $1.35. Current resistance is going to be about $2 to 230, and then above that $3 to about 360. So the drop from the current price would be about 22%. However, if it just goes straight up, you'd be looking at about 31%, 65%, 102%, and 120% respectively. So this one is due in a couple of weeks. It's not going to happen immediately. So the more important ones I would say is CleanSpark, Mara, BTBT, and CIFR. Those are the ones to watch out for next week. So now let's get into the options. So before I do that, I want to show you guys what our current holdings are. Excuse me, give me a second. This damn sickness. Okay. So you guys can see here we have 310 shares currently of HUD-8. We have basically 1,400 shares of BTBT. And we have 200 shares of Riot, 300 shares of CleanSpark, and we have one put currently on Mara. You guys can see that right there. So we'll take a look at our average prices. You guys, I mean, not that you guys are really going to care, but if you were curious, all of these except for CleanSpark are basically in the buy zone. So $10 on HUD-8, as you guys can see there. And then BTBT, this one we really have a lot of money in because, again, the smaller the market cap, the bigger the move. Generally, it is a bit more risky, but I mean, Soundhound and ALT were risky too, but we made a lot of money on that as well. So 246, again, that is pretty close to the buy zone. And price does seem to be moving up into the earnings, so that's a good sign. So Riot 1017, I mean, that's pretty close to support. As you guys can see there, we're actually in profit on Riot. And CLSK was the one that we kind of goofed on, but it's not a big deal. We're not really too worried about it. I mean, we've been in this situation before. It's rare for us to experience this, but it does happen from time to time. So 2350 on CleanSpark. Current price 1640. So now let's take a look at some of the options for these. So the main thing that we do is the wheel strategy, or selling puts and selling calls, basically. So you guys can see that going a week out, the options premiums for these are pretty good. Again, they do have earnings, but even without the earnings, the options premiums are still really good. So basically one contract here at $18 with a 30 delta would be about $50 a week. If you didn't really want to get assigned, you kind of wanted to hold on to your shares. If you were looking to get assigned, you'd want a higher delta. If you were not looking to get assigned, you would want a lower delta. And that's true for both the calls and the puts. So if you did not want to get assigned, you'd probably want to do something like this that gives you basically a 78% chance of not getting assigned. Again, that's $30 a week. That's still $120 a month. So on the put side, you guys can see it's very similar. So if we go down to like maybe a 1450, you can see the delta here is 23. That's relatively safe. Again, that's one contract or about $160 a month. This would be a little bit more risky, although it's safer for things that are less volatile than the miners. That's about $220 a month. For us, because of the fact that we have our share price at $23.50, we would have to basically write calls all the way up here until the price comes back up to that price. Once it does get there, obviously the options premiums are going to be much higher because, again, the stock is much higher. That's generally how it works. Excuse me. But if we were really concerned about collecting the optimal amount of premium, we'd just go like a month out, if I'm being completely honest. Again, it's not much, but 2 contracts, $45 per contract a month out, $25 strike price, which would give us about $1.50 in profit, plus the premiums, you'd be looking at about $90 a month. So we'll go now into Mara. Go to trade options here. So Mara is also pretty good, actually. So if we go like with a 1950, for example, again, that'd be about $50 a week per contract. And that's kind of roughly middle of the road. I would say for the miners, anything between a 20 to a 30 is relatively safe. Again, it's not a guarantee that you're not going to get assigned. It just gives you a high probability of not getting assigned, but there's no guarantees. So 16, 25 deltas, similar thing, about 160, 170 bucks a month. That's for one contract. That's not for multiple contracts. If you had like 10 contracts, then it'd be a lot more. It'd be like $1,700 a month. So that's something to keep in mind. So Riot Sell Call, this one, again, the premium's not as high, but again, the stock price is also not as high, and it's not as popular as Mara and CleanSpark. So even something like this, I mean, that'd be 20 bucks a week for basically an 1150 call, which again is not much. And on the put side, let's say a 35 delta is probably a little high. If I was going to do this, I'd probably go with the 21 delta here. So about $15 a week per contract. I mean, again, if you wanted to do 10 contracts, which at this point would be $9,500, that's a lot of money. But I mean, the options premiums would be pretty good. And if you think Riot's going to double in price, I mean, you'd be looking at a $9,500 profit. So the premium might not be much. It might just be $150 a week, which is a lot for a lot of dividend investors. Okay, a lot of dividend investors think $150 a week is a lot. It is. But the real power of the options in this case would be the magnification of your money. You would double your money, so your 9,500 would turn into 19,000. So now we'll go into HUD 8. Just kind of try to blast through these real quick because there's a lot of them. So you guys can kind of see the premiums here. Obviously, the lower the stock price, the lower the premium. So again, basically $12 a week for a 20 delta. Maybe you could go a little bit more aggressive, do a 31 delta for 23 a week, which is still $100 a month. And on the put side, maybe something like a 750. Yeah, it's a little high. I probably wouldn't go with that. And again, you guys don't have to do weekly options. You can do bi-weekly, monthly. You can go 3 months out, 6 months out. It's up to you. But we really like the weekly ones. So again, this will be $64 in premium for a month. Based on personal experience now, I would say probably the best miners to do options on would be CleanSpark, Mara, and Riot, in my opinion. HUD 8 to some extent. But when you get into these smaller ones like CIFR, BTBT, and bitf, it's more of, I would say it's more of like a swing trade play, or you're looking for the top of the bull run, not necessarily for options. So you can see the options here on a weekly time frame are pretty much nothing. So you get $5 per contract per week. It's better than nothing, but again, it's not a lot, not compared to something like Mara and CleanSpark. So we can go to BTBT. We did do some options on these, but these were much more long dated options than just a week. And you guys will understand why, because as you guys can see, even on the call side on the weekly, there's literally nothing for calls going 1 week out. And hardly anything for the puts either. So, I mean, again, a $2 put is, you're getting $5 for that. That's actually pretty cheap. But the premium, even at 34 days out here, is not really all that great. So even with at the money, you're looking at $15 per contract, and that's at $250. That's if you wanted to get basically guaranteed to get your shares called away. Of course, you wouldn't want your share price to be below $250 so you can make profit, but that's just something to keep in mind. So Bitfarms. So yeah, again, pretty much nothing here on the calls and or the puts. I mean, literally nothing at all. You see the volume is very scarce compared to something like CleanSpark or Mara. If you go a little bit further out, again, still nothing. A little bit here on the call side, but not much. Again, the volume is quite small compared to something like Mara. So, anyways, this is our video on the Bitcoin miners and potential options premiums you could make on a weekly and or biweekly, monthly basis. Hope you all enjoyed this content. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see y'all later. Peace.